So Disney has just announced that they are not renewing Star Wars The Acolyte for Season 2. And I had some thoughts about that. Actually, it's kind of interesting. So if you are vaguely interested in Star Wars, which you should be, then stay tuned and we'll chat. Hi guys, it's me. I've got a nice cold beer. It's Friday. Happy Friday, everyone. Congratulations to making it to the end of the week. I'll tell you something that didn't make it to the end of the week, and that is The Acolyte, which was a most recent Star Wars show on Disney+. It was a very controversial show. There was a lot of stuff going on around it. And I heard today that Disney had decided to cancel the show. They're not going to make a season 2. And I had some thoughts about that. Because I'll admit, as far as The Acolyte goes, I actually quite enjoyed the show. I watched all 6 episodes, and there were definitely flaws to it, which I'll discuss. But overall, I actually really quite enjoyed it. And I haven't watched everything. I mean, the problem with Disney Plus as a service is you've got all these streaming shows, and you kind of get overwhelmed. And so you pick and choose the ones that you actually want to watch. Like, I love Marvel, but I haven't watched Moon Knight, and I haven't watched Echo. And I will admit, and a lot of Star Wars fans are going to be mad at me for this, but I haven't watched Andor as a show either. But overall, like, I've just really, really enjoyed all the Star Wars shows that I've watched. I really, really, really enjoyed The Mandalorian Season 3, and I know on the internet everyone was complaining about it. I loved it. There was literally one episode which started off with, with them flying through space and into the atmosphere, and there are TIE fighters chasing them, and then the Mandalorian zooms out in his jetpack, and then he gets his own ship, and he comes up behind them and shoots them, and I was transported back to being like an 8-year-old kid with my action figures going pew, 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 pew. It was brilliant. So, there are lots of people who complained about Season 3 of The Mandalorian, and I think that they can all suck it. Why don't you just enjoy something and have fun? And really, that's the problem with Star Wars at the moment, is nobody can just enjoy stuff and have fun. Everyone's got to bloody complain about everything all the time. And The Acolyte got more complaints than perhaps any other Star Wars show that has come before it. To the point where before the show had even come out, people were complaining about it online. And I remember I heard, when I opened up my YouTube app, I'm doing the washing up, I always like to watch a YouTube video, and if the Bond Experience or Calvin Dyson hasn't made one, I'll watch whatever comes up in the feed. And for some reason, the YouTube algorithm always gives me a bunch of like vaguely right-wing people complaining constantly about everything being woke and everything being terrible and everything needing to be cancelled. And they went on about The Acolyte, and it's like, oh, this is the gayest Star Wars ever, and Leslie Headland, who is the showrunner, she used to work for Harvey Weinstein, and it's all woke, and I almost didn't really start watching the show because I was like, oh, it's going to be woke, is it? It's not going to be very good. But I started watching it, and I quite enjoyed the first episode. I know it didn't grab me in the same way. I guess a lot of people complain about the Star Wars shows. Most of the Star Wars shows just grab me. I really liked Ahsoka. I really, really liked Ahsoka. Loved The Mandalorian, all 3 seasons. So it didn't quite grab me quite like that, but I enjoyed it. And then episode 2 came along, and episode 2 had a point in it that I really didn't like, which I'll get to, but I kind of enjoyed it. But then every time I was doing the washing up in the evenings, the YouTube algorithm would give me new videos with people going like, this is the wokest Star Wars ever, they're breaking canon, this is an insult to Star Wars, this is going to destroy Star Wars. And I'll admit, it got to the point where my middle child, who's 13, he and I, we love Star Wars. And we watch all the shows together, and it's kind of like a bonding thing. And I remember we got to episode 4, and then we kind of took a break. Because, he's a kid, he's off doing other things. And I was just, like, not enthused about it, because I kept listening to all these people tell me how terrible The Acolyte was. And I was kind of like, well, maybe The Acolyte's going to be terrible, maybe I'm not going to watch it. And eventually I did watch the final 2 or the final 4 episodes, I can't remember, is it 8 episodes? But I kind of enjoyed the whole thing from beginning to end. I definitely had a couple of issues with it, But overall, it kept my attention all the way to the end, and it had a denouement that was actually kind of interesting and thought provoking. And so when I heard the news that it was being cancelled, I was kind of like, that's a bit sad, really. And I think online, I try not. Twitter's one of those places that, I don't know, Twitter's like a garbage can. It's like it exists because that's where all the crap goes. But sometimes you go to Twitter and you see what conversations people are having, and I genuinely think that a lot of the people who are complaining really bitterly about the Acolyte now are kind of like, oh my god, they actually did cancel it. Because they're so used to complaining about stuff constantly, and it's still being made. They didn't ever think that it was actually going to get cancelled, and then they were like, what have we done? It's kind of like buyer's remorse. As a quick aside, I remember when Brexit happened, my sister and I, we were kind of like, oh, Brexit? Yeah, why not? We'll vote for that. Never thinking it was going to happen. And then it happened, and I remember my sister and I had a conversation the next day, and we're like, what did we do? And anyway, yeah, well, there we go. So I think a lot of Star Wars fans are kind of looking at the Acolyte, and they're kind of like, what did we do? We got it cancelled. Because it really wasn't that bad. It was actually kind of fun. It actually had some really cool things in it. The things that I really enjoyed were in a whole different era of Star Wars, and that was kind of interesting to watch. You know, the Jedi at their peak with their training programs and stuff. You had some really great characters in it. The lead character, Master Sol, who is played by the Squid Games guy. Like, I heard he learned English 3 months before this, and I think some of his dialogue was a little stilted, but something he brought to it was really convincing. And his character, I mean, he at the end of the day, the first season of The Acolyte was all about him. For most of the show, you're like, oh, he's the quintessential Jedi Master. Yeah, he's a bit of a rebel. But he's got empathy, and he loves Osha, and he wants to look out for her. And at the very end, what I think was kind of cool and unique, and I found really satisfying, was like, no, actually, this guy made a mistake, made a bad call. It ended disastrously, and then he spent all the years since trying to cover it up. And it really kind of like pulled the wool from your eyes, pulled the rug from under you, because it subverted your expectations. You thought, oh, he's the heroic Jedi guy, and then the bad guy in it, and I can't think of the actor's name, but he was brilliant throughout the whole thing. He started off as like this the whimpering sidekick guy, and then suddenly it turned out he was a badass Sith, and he was cool, and he said clever stuff, and he was charming and intimidating, and like everything you kind of want in a villain. So I found him kind of a cool character to have. And the whole thing got subverted because the heroine who left the Jedi Order ended up going with this guy who is a Sith Lord. And that subverted expectations. Didn't really sit well with me, because I was kind of like, what message are you trying to put across here? But it was still kind of interesting. The lightsaber fights were so cool. There was one where this evil bad guy was like taking on 6 Jedi all at once, and it was brilliant, and it was filmed brilliantly, and it got me as excited as when I watched the cool lightsaber fights in the prequel movies, which I love the prequel movies. There was the scene where the bad guy kills Master Sol's apprentice, and he does it so unexpectedly and so brutally, and then she's actually dead. And there's this other character, God, I can't remember his name. He's kind of a jackass, but he's by the books kind of Jedi guy, and he gets his neck snapped brutally, and it was cool, because you're like, oh my god, these are characters that over the course of the last few episodes we've actually become invested in, and they're just getting murdered right in front of us. And this isn't like Marvel, they don't come back to life, they're dead. And I thought that was quite effective as well. So it was a flawed show, but it had some really, really interesting, cool elements to it. One thing that all of the people on the internet lost their shit about was the fact that there was a scene in which you had Jedi Master Kai-Adi-Mundi, who's like the pointy-headed dude from the Phantom Menace, in it. And they were like, why are you bringing out in this legacy character? And it's because he didn't have a huge role in the prequel movies, but he did have this line where Qui-Gon Jinn is saying, we believe this might be I can't do an Irish accent. Oh, we believe this might be a Sith Lord. And he goes, but the Sith haven't existed for millennia. And then everyone on the internet was like, well, if he said the Sith haven't existed for millennia, 100 years after this show is set, well, how do you explain why we got a Sith right now? And it's like, that's the point. That's the point of why he was there. Because the whole basis of the show was the Jedi encounter a Sith, the Sith slaughters them, and then some elements within the Jedi Order cover it up. And so the reason this character, Kai-Adi-Mundi, was in there was to demonstrate the fact that 100 years in the future, he would still be under the impression that the Sith hadn't existed for millennia, because the cover-up that had occurred while he was there was so good. And I think part of the reason all of this internet conversation about the Acolyte was really kind of harmful was because people were losing their shit over the fact that this character was in there and saying, oh, it breaks canon. But actually, if you went right through to the end of the series, you realise there was a point for him being in there, and it kind of pays off something from the prequel movies, which I think is kind of cool. It's like a line this character hasn't said yet is a line that exists in our narrative past, and therefore it all comes together in a circular fashion. All stories are circles. What is it George Lucas said? It's like poetry. It rhymes. So I liked that, and it kind of got to me. The problem with having episode by episode every week, things get released, is people were losing their shit over stuff that was happening in an episode, whereas really we should have been like, hey, they have, got our attention with what they're doing in this episode. Maybe it's going to pay off in the next episode. Maybe just cut them some slack. Maybe assume they know what they're doing. And that being said, one of the drawbacks of the Acolyte was the fact that there were parts of it where I don't think they did know what they were doing. The one bit that really, really, really stuck out to me and really annoyed me and pulled me out of my just innocent, joyous enjoyment of the show was in the second episode. There was this scene where Jedi Master Sol has met up with Osha, his one-time apprentice, and they have to go and find another Jedi Master called Torben. Now I can remember all their names. Can't remember the names of the more interesting characters, but these side characters, absolutely remember all of them. Anyway, so they fly to this planet, and this guy Torben has been floating in a meditative thing for 15 years because he's so traumatized by what happened and the thing that they're covering up, which ends up being the whole point of the show. And they arrive on this planet, and Jedi Master Sol and all the other Jedi and Osha bust open the doors of the Jedi Temple, and they're like, we must go and see Torben. And they go marching at quite a cracking pace to what one assumes would be the most direct route to this guy Torben. And along the way, Osha gets distracted by something, and she's like, oh, I got distracted by something, I'll wander off this way. And the others are so intent on getting to Jedi Master Torben as quickly and as efficiently as possible that they continue marching. But what happens is, Osha disappears off and goes through a side door, and boom, suddenly she's in Torben's room. And the others haven't arrived yet, and she gets to witness Torben die, and he's kind of killed by her sister, and that's a big thing, and then she gets falsely accused of it. And I was just like, that's really stupid, because these Jedi were marching through this temple to try and meet this guy, going the most direct route, and then Osha disappears off to go on her little side quest, but gets there before them. So if she could get there faster by taking this side door, why wasn't that the route that they all took? And it was just bad writing. It was just stupid writing. I'm like, well, what were they doing? Were they taking the long road? The long route? I don't know. Did they want to walk past all the medals for all the Jedi apprentices had won in softball or something? I don't know. It was stupid. And I remember at that point getting snapped out of my pure flow enjoyment of the show thinking, that's stupid. And yeah, that was one of the flaws that kind of spoiled the show for me, because I don't like stuff that's stupid. And I think when you are spending over $100 million on a TV show, you need to not have stuff in it that's like blatantly stupid. And that actually leads me on to my second complaint about it, which isn't a complaint about the Acolyte specifically. It's more about Disney Plus shows as a whole. And it's to do with writers. Like, I think the writers made a really stupid decision with that one scene. I know that scene didn't last very long. I know it might not seem important, but to me it's important. Because, you know, when you write something, you want it to make sense. You don't have to be the best writer in the world, but what you want to do is write something that when people read it, they don't sit up and go, oh, that's dumb. No, you just want them to like go along with the storyline. And so that was bad writing. And it highlighted to me the other thing about the writing of not just the Acolyte, but also a lot of other Disney Plus shows. Not just the Star Wars ones, but also the Marvel ones. I can specifically think, I mean, I know Andor's meant to be very good, but Andor was kind of guilty of this. Secret Invasion was kind of guilty of this. The movie Captain Marvel, which was like that was the movie that had the chink in Marvel's armor. Until then, they'd been unassailable. Every single movie they made was great, and then people didn't quite like Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel, I thought was a fine film. I mean, it made over $1 billion, but also it had this thing with the writing that has become a real problem in the stuff that Disney Plus make, and that is a non-linear timeline. And a non-linear timeline is when you have your narrative events and you chop and change between the timelines. If you ever seen Pulp Fiction? Pulp Fiction, great movie. And that's got a non-linear timeline because you have certain scenes, but they occur out of order. So some scenes that you watch are set in the future and some scenes are set in the past. And so you might see one character die, but he comes back in another scene later because that scene is actually set earlier. It's a great, clever technique. It's a gimmick, but it's like Quentin Tarantino is the master of that gimmick, and Pulp Fiction is like a great example of when you do it really, really well. But the whole point of a non-linear timeline is there has to be a reason for it, and often that reason is a gimmick. And like Pulp Fiction especially, you had the non-linear timeline because you were able to then reveal pieces of information in the future and the past that made scenes you saw later make more sense and give you that little dopamine hit. And Disney seemed really, really committed to telling all their stories with a non-linear timeline. And the problem with that is, if you're Quentin Tarantino and you're doing it as a gimmick, then that works really well. If you're trying to just tell a story and you're using a non-linear timeline, then it's kind of disjointed and it's kind of unnecessary. The thing about writing is writing should always be clear, not clever. You just want to tell the story as effectively as you can. And having a non-linear timeline is not an effective way to tell a story because it can be confusing. And I mean, maybe I sound like a dumb person, but one of the reasons I kind of got confused with Andor is they had a non-linear timeline. So I watched one episode with, who's that guy, Stellan Skarsgård or something? I don't know, the guy who played the chief freedom fighter. And the problem was, because he was a mature guy, he didn't really age between the scenes set in the modern day and the scenes that were set as kind of like flashbacks. And so I genuinely kind of got confused about, oh, is this scene set now or is this scene set in the past? And you shouldn't be getting confused when you're watching a show on Disney Plus. Like, it should be it should be a straightforward thing to watch. And I know with the Acolyte they were kind of going for a whodunit thing, so I could understand to a certain extent what they were trying to achieve by having a non-linear timeline. And the whole point was we were presented with these characters in the modern day. The next a couple of episodes later, we went back to when the characters were kids, and then a next episode later we went back to the modern day, and then we went back like to when they were kids again, and we discovered something else, and that meant when they had the the denouement at the very end, you were able to understand what Master Sol had done and the significance of it, because you had learned stuff that had happened in the past that impacted your impression of what happened in the future. So I understand that, but I don't think it worked really that well. And I didn't enjoy the fact that the show jumped the timelines like that. Maybe I'm a little fuddy-duddy or something like that, but I just thought it was kind of unnecessary. And it's been unnecessary in other shows and other films. I think I mentioned Captain Marvel as the perfect example. Like, if they had just not had a non-linear timeline with Captain Marvel, if they'd started things at the beginning where Captain Marvel was an Air Force pilot and she got involved with this experimental program, and then her plane crashed, and then she woke up with amnesia and she didn't know who she was for a while, and she joined this alien task force, and then when she went to Earth and she regained her memories and fought the aliens and became a hero, that works. And instead they were doing, she doesn't have any recollection of who she is, and then she goes to Earth, and then she has some flashbacks where you understand why. And it's like that non-linear timeline was completely unnecessary. You might say, oh, we got a non-linear timeline because then it reveals who she really was. And it's like, it's Captain Marvel. She's a superheroine who has existed in comics for decades. Everyone knows who she is. The film is called Captain Marvel, so you don't need to do that. You're not revealing any information in a useful or viable way. You could just tell the story in a straight, chronologically accurate narrative, and it would work better. And the same Secret Invasion. As I said, the same with Andor. A lot of the shows now, Disney, are just putting out, and they are all written in this kind of non-linear fashion. And it's not like it's original. It's not like they're coming up with new and experimental things when they're doing it. If you've ever heard... Do I have a copy of it right here? Anyway, there's a book called Save the Cat. Screenwriting book. Came out like 20 years ago, I think. And basically it breaks down, this is your blueprint for a screenplay. And if you ever read that book, it ruins movies for you, because you realize when that book got published, suddenly every single screenwriter was writing every single movie using the beats of Save the Cat. And now it makes every single movie that you watch really, really predictable. And when it comes to the way Disney use a non-linear timeline, it is almost exactly the same thing. It's kind of like, oh, every single episode follows a template of, we have this episode set in the modern day, and then we have this episode set in the past, and then this goes back to the modern day, and then we go to another time. And it's kind of like, you shouldn't templatize a non-linear timeline, because a non-linear timeline should be used as a gimmick. If there is not a really, really specific reason why you should use a non-linear timeline, you probably shouldn't use it. And that, to me, was the other thing that really kind of like stood out with the Acolyte, and I didn't like it for that reason. I thought it was kind of unnecessary. But on the whole, I thought the show was fine. It wasn't my favourite show. It most definitely wasn't my least favourite show. I wasn't massively invested in it, but there were parts of it that I enjoyed. And if they'd made a season 2, I would have watched it. I think they'd raised a couple of interesting questions. They got, I can't remember her name, the Green Lady, who is a kind of Jedi with authority, and she is very clearly, at the end of the series, she was very clearly gearing up to have a cover-up in the Jedi, and it's a cover-up that we knew would work, and we know it would work because Ki Adi Mundi, in 100 years' time in The Phantom Menace, would say, but the Sith have been extinct for a millennia, and therefore we know that he is not aware of the fact there was a Sith running around 100 years ago. So that was kind of interesting, and I was kind of interested to see how that might pay off. And I love the evil Jedi, the evil Sith guy, and now he has Osha, a former Jedi who left the Order, and now she's kind of signed on with him, having just killed her former master. And that is the way they left it. I'm really confused about the message they're trying to portray here. It's like, I know another trait that Disney is terrible for is like deconstructing heroes. It's like, hey, Han Solo, he's a scoundrel, he's a rebel, he went this fantastic character arc in Star Wars. Let's just make him a useless smuggler again. Luke Skywalker, wow, he was just a kid in the farm, went through this huge character arc and became this incredibly good Jedi Master. When I make sequel movies, let's just make him a bum drinking blue milk on a planet full of space puffins. It's like, I hate the way they deconstruct the stuff that we love. And this season of The Acolyte, they kind of did that, and I don't even think it's subverting expectations. They subverted the narrative. The Jedi we think is supposed to be good, and they made them come across as bad. And the Sith we are meant to think are bad, and the Sith character in this was kind of cool, and you can understand why Osha wants to go with him. And I'm kind of like, this is an interesting, weird position to leave our heroine in. And so I was kind of intrigued where they might have gone with that in season 2. I'm not sure I would have liked it, but I was intrigued. What is it they say in that? Quentin Tarantino, talking about Quentin Tarantino, and goes, you have my curiosity, but now you have my attention. So yeah, you have my attention. So I think it's a little sad that The Acolyte is not being renewed for season 2. Again, there was some things they were teasing. They had Darth Plagueis in it, just for a second. And I just finished reading Plagueis, which is a big, thick, really well-written novel. I was reading it out loud to my kid. And so I know all about Darth Plagueis. And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting to see him. So they had a lot of interesting things. And I think it's kind of sad that this might be the last we hear about it. I don't think it's going to be the last we hear about it. I think they might revisit and take elements of it. But The Acolyte, as we know it as a show, has kind of died. And it's kind of died because, to a certain extent, Star Wars fans killed it. And so maybe Star Wars fans should just chill out. Maybe when they make Star Wars stuff, you can criticize it, absolutely, go ahead, but maybe you shouldn't just hate it so much. And it was kind of infectious, and I was like, well, maybe I'm not going to watch The Acolyte because they keep saying it's so terrible. Maybe it is terrible. Maybe I'm not going to give it the light of day. And that would, I think, to be honest, if I hadn't been subjected to all of that really quite unfair criticism, I probably would have watched all the episodes sooner, and I probably would have enjoyed them all. So I really do think this is a bit of a wake-up call for Star Wars fans in general to maybe just chill out. Maybe just take a deep breath and enjoy what we have the wonderful opportunity to watch. And to me, that's the thing that I really love. I said earlier, season 3 of The Mandalorian, I know a lot of Star Wars fans criticized that and didn't like it. I loved it. Do you know why I loved it? Because I watched it and I felt like an 8-year-old kid again playing with my toys, going pew pew pew, zoom pew. I loved it for that particular reason. And so maybe if the people who love Star Wars just chill out for a bit and are just more open to just enjoying it, they aren't going to find so much stuff to complain about. I definitely think shows and show writers and showrunners need to be held accountable when they make mistakes, like that whole thing with Osha going through the side door and suddenly leaping ahead of everyone else who was trying to go directly to the Sky Tournament. That was a stupid mistake. That shouldn't have made it to the finished product. But every single show, every single movie makes mistakes. Have you ever listened to the dialogue in the original Star Wars movies? It's really badly written, but we don't care. We don't care because we love it. And so maybe just take a chill pill, take a step back, take a deep breath, and enjoy what we get the opportunity to watch. Because it is a wonderful time to be a Star Wars fan. I mean, I remember being a massive Star Wars fan with my brother. It was something that we really, really loved together. And then what happened is they didn't make a Star Wars film for 15, 20 years. And then they made the prequel movies. And I remember really, really enjoying them. And I was like, okay, there's a lot of CGI. Maybe the dialogue's a bit cheesy, but I really, really enjoyed them. And it was exciting. And then again, there was just like a desert of nothingness for Star Wars fans. And now we're getting all of this cool live action Star Wars content. And for the most part, it's great. I loved Ahsoka. I loved The Mandalorian seasons 1, 2, and 3. I hear Andor is really good. Maybe the movies, I do have some issues with the movies, but I mean that first one, The Force Awakens, that was great. So maybe just lighten up, just freaking enjoy it. And maybe maybe what was wrong with the Acolyte wasn't entirely to do with the Acolyte, but maybe it was also something wrong with the people who were watching it or talking about it. Like, maybe there's that. Maybe we as fans should accept some responsibility for the fact that we basically got this show killed. And, you know, maybe the show didn't deserve to be renewed. I'm not quite sure. But I do kind of feel like we have a bit of responsibility for what happened to it. And I think what comes next might be less because of that. There's just people at Disney doing Star Wars. They might play it safer. And I definitely don't think you should go through the whole thing of deconstructing the heroes like they've done with the Last Jedi and stuff like that. But at the same time, you don't always want to play it safe. You don't always want to rehash old territory. Sometimes you want to do stuff that's new. So yeah, I think we bear some responsibility for that. But I don't know. You tell me, did you watch The Acolyte? What did you think about it? Let me know down in the comment section below. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Do you think I'm talking out of my arse when I say that maybe we shouldn't have been so hateful about it? You tell me. But yeah, that's my thought. I don't even know when the next Star Wars thing is coming out, and that's kind of sad, to be honest. So we will just have to wait and see. And until then, yeah, until then, I'll just have to go back to reading all the books with my kid. So, right, here's to you, and I'll be back sometime soon with another video. Ciao.